Our function in this class is to delve into the higher mysteries. You may find that less and less we're not going to discuss any personal problems. We're not going to be concerned about the world not created by God. And that may be very difficult for some, but it has to come. There has to be a time when we're no longer saying, God, heal me of this and heal me of that. There has to come a time when we're no longer saying, God, you've withheld this from me and you've withheld that from me. There has to come a time of acceptance, not of seeking, but of acceptance. And this concerns the higher mysteries, the above universe, the universe right where the visible universe seems to appear. Today, it will be well if you can learn what makes an image. For you have one image called the world, and in it are many images, all part of the same image. And so we want to burst that bubble today, so that some of you who have been living in the mind universe, trying through the power of your mind to find some kind of peace, some kind of tranquility, some kind of solution, will discover that you've been living in the wrong universe, and in the wrong body, and in the wrong century, seeking in some way to improve God's perfect universe because you're unaware of it. We see Jesus on his feet, hands and knees, and he's washing the feet of Peter. Yes, the master seems to be washing the feet of a student. And this is drawing the curtain to the inner mystery of Christ within Peter. This is drawing the mystery into visibility by telling you and telling me that if you wish to walk in the universe of God, instead of the kingdom that is this world, not of the Father, but of the sense mind, you too will have to wash your feet. Not only yours, but the feet of the world. You'll have to see that the Master is revealing the secret of his great work is not his personal ability, but his capacity to say, the only me here is the inner Christ. There is no human me. I wash the feet. That which walks upon this earth, I am dissolving in my consciousness. I am recognizing the inner Christ of Peter, and in so doing the inner Christ of every man, woman, and child on this earth. And I, who seem to be the master, am but the servant of this inner Christ. Therefore, when thou seest me, thou seest the activity of the inner Christ, not of a man. And the inner Christ that I glorify as I walk this earth is the inner Christ of Peter, the inner Christ of Bill, the inner Christ of Mary, the inner Christ of everyone who walks this earth. And therefore it behooves Bill, it behooves Mary, it behooves Betty, it behooves Herb, it behooves every individual on the face of the earth to get on his hands and knees, which is the surrender of humanhood, until in that yielding of self, the invisible self is brought into activity in the visible experience world. Of mine own self, I can do nothing. And as long as I continue in the effort, I will fall into the image world. And while I am under the belief that I am loving God supremely, I am actually accusing God, condemning God for the evil he leaves on the earth, accusing him even of creating it. Now you know that condemnation has by now become very small in your consciousness. You can see the thief without accusing him. You can see the corruption in government without accusing. You can see many facets of the imperfect human life without condemnation. And probably you pride yourself upon it. What we don't realize too often is that we are condemning God. We have risen to that level where we do not condemn our neighbor, but instead we condemn God. How? Take the Crusader. I don't mean back in the medieval times. I mean today's Crusader, for good, for improvements. How do we improve anything except by recognizing that which needs improvement? And therefore, what have we said? We have said there are two creations. God's creation, which we will accept as perfect, but there's also a creation that needs improvement. And so we are going to crusade for the improvements. And we're stuck with two creations. We've fallen into the trap of believing that God is aware of these things that need improvement in this earth and is doing nothing about it, so we're going to do it. Of course, we're in a human consciousness. We have fallen into the trap of human images. Most of you have never heard what I'd like to tell you. It's about this world of images and what makes it so. There's a process in photo engraving where you make a photograph of any object or person, and then in order to reproduce that, let's say in a newspaper, you make a photograph of the photograph. And when you make a photograph of the photograph, you put a filter or a screen between the object or photograph you're going to photograph and your camera. And so now you get a new photograph of a photograph. This one is filtered or screened so that the photograph is broken down into all kinds of little dots. And then you photograph this onto metal. Then you put an emulsion on the metal, and then you put acid on the emulsion, and finally you get these dots so they're raised up. And that's all that's raised up, the photograph of the original photograph, broken into dots, raised up. And then you put ink on the surface of these raised up dots, and you turn the metal over and you print on a newspaper. You print those dots. And every time you pick up a newspaper and look at a face, you're not aware of it. You think that's Richard Nixon. That's Chew and Lie. That's John Mitchell. That's John Lindsay. And every time you look at these photographs in the paper, you're looking at nothing but little blobs of ink that are separated. They're really little dots. And in about 1 inch, there are maybe 3,600 to 4,000 little dots. That's really what you're looking at. Your eye doesn't know it. Your mind doesn't know it. You're looking at dots, but you think it's John Lindsay, Richard Nixon. And really, there's just as many dots to make a Richard Nixon as there is a John Lindsay. You can take the same dots and rearrange them and make a hippopotamus. You can make an elephant. If you rearrange the dots, you can make anything that is on this earth. You can make a battleship, spacecraft. In other words, your eye doesn't see the dots. But if you take just a normal magnifying glass and look at any photograph in the newspaper, that's what you're going to see. Hold it there just until, raise it up or down, until you see, why, it's only made of dots. And I thought it was a man's face. The face is the image formed by the dots. But all that is on that paper are little black dots, and they're all identical. Put a few more on one side and you get a cluster of them. A few less on another side and you get what seems to be a lighter tone, but they're all the same black dots. When I do this privately and give a magnifying glass to somebody and they look and see the dots, they're so much surprised that they hadn't noticed them with their naked eye. And that's how we all are, able for 50 years to read a newspaper and never know that we have never really seen a photograph. We have seen dots that appear to our human eye as faces and things. And then you can take this and go right to your television screen and you'll see it's the same process. On the television screen, you're looking at electric dots. Dots of electricity. But you cannot see the dots. And as the electric moves, you see the movement of the dots, but you don't know it's the movement of electrical dots. So you say the horse is running. It isn't running. There's no horse there. You're looking at electrical dots to simulate a horse running. No horse is going to run out of that screen. It's an image on the screen, and the method is electrical dots, so fine that no human eye can see them. And so you get the forms. Now you go to the motion picture house. There's a giant screen and the same thing happens. Dots. They are still electrical dots. And you can have Cleopatra and her barge draw up. You can have the complete spectacle of Rome, and it's all made with electrical dots. Electrical dots that to the human eye appear as images called people doing things. Now these processes are human inventions. The Father does it much more subtly. When you come to the human scene, you find that the same process is going on around you. But now the dots are points of light, so fine that they have fooled the greatest religious and intellectual and scientific teachers of the world. Points of light. And you watch these points of light move, and you call them living forms. They are the very same process in a more sophisticated way, for he hangeth the earth on nothing. Now what you are looking and calling forms then are points of light moving. You're seeing the tree grow up, but you're not. You're seeing the slow motion of points of light below the level of your perception. You see the horse run on the track, but you're not. You see boys go out to war on battlefields, but you're looking at points of light. And when that cannon roars and a boy falls down and the blood pours, you're looking at points of light. You know you're not looking at God's creation, and there are not two creations. What are you looking at? You're looking at points of light in the cosmic mind. Wherever you look on this earth, that is all you will ever see. Points of light. You cannot find one thing on this earth made by God. Not one. And that is important. And however revolutionary it may seem to the human mind, it was a necessary step in the revelation of the allness of God, in the eternal life that comes into the experience of all who know God aright. Now, what you've been looking at and calling forms, people, things, places, conditions, are points of light in a cosmic telecast. And it has its purpose, and that purpose was explained to you in the Bible, but we walk by. In these points of light you see the dying soldier. You see the accident on the freeway. You see the long inventory of disease and disaster not created by God. You're looking at the image world of the mind, and often accusing the Father of putting it there. Why did you do this to my daughter? Why did you do this to my son? Why don't you change this and change that? But the Father doesn't change this and change that, for the simple reason that the Father does not see what you are seeing. The Father does not look at points of light in motion, seeming to us as real conditions of a real world. The Father is not dreaming. The Father is awake. The dream of mortality is where we see these points of light. Fortunately, we have them. They have a grand purpose. You have thought that everything wrong in your life couldn't possibly be attributed to you. As a matter of fact, we discover that most of us are pretty good human beings. And then we say, well, if I've been so good, why have I been completely isolated from happiness, health, abundance, the things and joyful relationships that a child of God ought to have? Why am I besieged by this endless parade of things that I have to keep solving? When does the day of solving stop? When can I relax and say, at last I've made it? And then suddenly there comes another problem. Out of nowhere. And it has a name. And yet, in spite of all, you've been reading your Bible. You've been listening to tapes. You've been as faithful as you know how, and as dedicated. Some put in as many as 20 hours a day, and still have things turn up that you would think after all this time and effort and dedication would be impossible. And that's why we go back to the story of the wheat and the tares. Nobody plants weeds. You've never planted any weeds. You certainly wouldn't do it intentionally. And neither did this man in the Bible. He planted wheat. But it wasn't long in season where there was wheat and tares, wheat and weeds. Couldn't figure it out. He hadn't planted any tares. So he went to his friends and they told him, well, what really happened, of course, is that your neighbor down the way, who you had that argument with last month, he got even with you. While you were asleep, he planted the tares. And so asleep, this man got weeds in his farm, and asleep we get problems in our consciousness. The tares planted while the farmer was asleep are the beliefs planted in you below the level of your conscious awareness, meaning in your sleep. You do not know what the world mind is broadcasting into you. You haven't the vaguest notion. How could you? You have a certain level of consciousness. If something comes in your unconscious, how can you be conscious of it? And so seeds are planted, seeds of belief. And the only time you become aware of them is when they grow up into form. And you can then look out and say, why did I get arthritis? Why did my business fail? Why did my marriage prove such a disaster? Why this, why that, why the other? You're only seeing these things on your screen of consciousness now as images. Broken homes, broken marriages, broken bodies. But they began in the unconscious level where the world mind planted in you a seed. And each seed planted in you must become a visible experience. That visible experience you then give the label and say, this is what I've got. But you haven't got that at all. What has happened is that from the invisible of your consciousness, a seed you did not know was there has grown into a tree, and it is now dropping fruit. And that is in your visible world. The image world is where you have seen the fruit of the tree of good and evil. And that fruit is very untasty at times. And it grows because the seeds of belief in your consciousness are there unknown to you. You did not know they were coming in. You did not know that they were growing up. You did not know about them until you began to suffer. The cause did not begin in you. The cause began in the world mind. And so a very intelligent, infinite mind has provided you with a screen, a television screen called the world. And from the invisible of your consciousness, you automatically project the quality of your consciousness. You project into the world of images the fabric of your own consciousness. And when you label it this or that, you're really saying, this is the nature of my invisible consciousness. Because be sure of this, it isn't someone else's consciousness appearing on your screen. The problems you manifest are nothing more than your consciousness turned inside out like a reversible raincoat, from the invisible to the visible. That's what this world is all about, a place where you can project your consciousness. And then looking at the world of images, you can go back to your consciousness, which is the land in which the wheat and the tares are growing side by side, in duality. And finally you come to the realization that there is no thing in this world which does not begin first in an invisible world. There's no child in this world that doesn't first begin in the invisible. No tree, no seed, no fruit, no flower, no animal, vegetable, mineral, or human begins in the visible. They begin in the invisible. And everything in this visible has a beginning in the invisible. That's what we all have in common. And therefore, if we were to live only in the visible, we would continue in the world of effect, never going into the cause of things, which is the invisible. And what is the cause of this imaged world that you live in? Your world is your consciousness. My world is my consciousness. And whoever is in this world is really in their own consciousness made visible. And so this is where the effects are in the world. That's the television screen where we can pick up what's right or wrong in our life. And now we go back into the invisible, into our consciousness. Because there we're going to find what's happening to make our visible world of good and evil. It is there where we're going to determine a way of dominion over the outer world of experience. Now we look at our consciousness and we see that it's subject to two forces. We're no longer dealing in the world of problems. Because if you meet a problem in the effect world of problems, you're never going to get to the cause of it, which is in your consciousness. And so you're in the invisible of your consciousness, and you discover that your consciousness has been fed by the wrong life stream, by the world mind. And that has brought forth the first birth, you, the image you. Your consciousness has brought forth the image you have called yourself. And your consciousness which brought forth this image has not been able to see reality directly. Because between your consciousness and reality, between your consciousness and the divine, there is the world mind, the glass darkly. And you're looking at the divine through the glass darkly of the world mind. And just like that photo engraving process I told you about, you're trying to make a photograph of the divine with your human consciousness. And there's a filter or screen between your human consciousness and the divine, and so you break the divine down into little dots of light. And then your consciousness projects these dots of light into the world as the image called you. These little dots of light, you know by now, are the atoms identified by science. Little dots of light. Little whirls of electrical energy so placed together that they look exactly like you. And you call those little whirls of atoms you, not knowing that is the image cast forth onto the screen of time and space by your consciousness. And that it is your consciousness where you must live, and you must learn to tune out that world mind which is between you and the divine, to let not the dots, not the filtered light come through, but the direct divine light of the Father. And there's a way to do it. And the way is the only way that is prescribed by those who have done it. You'll find that when your mind, your consciousness, has developed the capacity to be a vacuum, that it no longer receives the filtered light of the world mind. It is closed to the filtered light of the world mind, and it becomes a clear plate of glass. Crystal clear glass. And just as Jesus walked through a wall that was only there to the human consciousness, the divine walks through the world mind and through the clear crystal glass of your consciousness, bypassing the activity of that world mind which breaks things up into little atoms. coming through the crystal clear glass of your consciousness, which has been purified of thought. And that divine light is no longer separated atoms, no longer separated dots of light, but is the fullness of the Father, the wholeness of the Father, not little points of separation. And all that was missing out here in the image form, in the world of this human experience, was nothing more than gaps of light, which the divine now brings through. You have become a living embryo in the womb of the Father. That new spiritual womb of silence is really no different than the womb you inhabited as an embryo before you became an imaged human self. We really duplicate that condition. No mother has consciously fed the child in her womb. No embryo in the womb has consciously said to the mother, "Feed me." It's an automatic process. It happens. And when you have found the crystal clear consciousness of silence, the vacuum of no thought, when you have been able to put away the 1,001 human concepts that cram the brain, when you have been able to accept truth, divine truth, and have reached that place where the mind is at peace, then you are like the embryo. You are no longer saying to the Father, "Give me. This is what I want. This is what I need. This is my will, that you fulfill my will here." But rather you are resting in the womb of infinity with trust, wanting nothing, needing nothing, seeking nothing, just like a child in the mother's womb. That spiritual embryo is the method in which you defeat the world mind. As long as you have a thought, an idea, a plan, a scheme, a will, a belief, or an acceptance of anything in this world that you consider real, you're not ready for that womb. You still have house cleaning to do. To be a womb in the Father's, to be an embryo in the womb of the Father, you must be the pure at heart, willing to seek nothing of good and nothing of evil in the dream of mortality. For the Father is source, and the source is pure, and that pure being, which is the Father, is the essence of your being. And you must be fed by the essence of your being, not something else. You rest in the conscious awareness that the pure being called the Father is here as my life. And I even past the point then of saying, "Speak, Father, thy Son heareth." But rather, there is no you to say that. You go past that point and you see the real meaning of what Samuel said. He had so purified himself that there was no Samuel there. And then the Christ within Samuel said to the Father, "Speak, Father, thy Son heareth." When you hear the words within you, it is Christ saying this to the Father, who is greater than I. These words are the sign that you have stripped yourself of the dream. Not that you have said them humanly, but that they have been said within you by the Christ to the Father. And now the revelation of oneness takes place. In your silence, of humanhood. There's no place for world mind to go. You are not a receiver for the world mind. It can plant no tares in your consciousness. It can plant no seeds in you that will become tomorrow's problems. You are still. And now the essence of being, not broken into little dots of light, flows through your stillness. And the Father feeds the Son as the mother feeds the child in her womb. This is soul feeding. I am the bread, and the real substance that feeds you as a spiritual embryo is the essence of God, the substance of God, the will of God, the power of God, the love of God, all become your hidden manna, your meat the world knows not of. You are fed by the divine. There's nothing more to do. The feeding takes place. And now this is what you image forth into the world as a better body, a better mind, a better life, a better demonstration. You are glorifying the Father. You are not saying to your mother, feed me this way or that way, here's what I prefer. You're saying to the Father, let me have your food. I'm silent to the food of the world. And the food of the Father is his own being, all that I have. The very life of the Father flows through you. And so essence flows through your purified consciousness and becomes imaged form. The outer form then is manifesting the qualities of the new substance. And the new substance is pure wheat. It isn't divided. It isn't good and evil. Now the purification which enables Christ in you to say to the Father, speak, Father, thy Son heareth, is the working in the invisible in your consciousness to consciously turn it away from the duality of the world mind. In other words, you tune in by tuning out of the world mind. You tune out of the world mind to tune in for your divine feeding. The you of you is forgotten in the image world. That's going to be the result of how well you're fed in the inner. And if you've learned your lessons properly, you don't let that outer image self tempt you to fulfill its ambitions, its will, its needs. You are out of the imaged world. You are working on the level of consciousness. Now this is the meaning of washing the feet. I, who stand before you, washing your feet, Peter, I am showing you that within you is a consciousness which is pure. And it is the actual life of God. And I am serving that life of God in you and in myself and in everyone I meet, letting that life live itself through my conscious awareness of its presence, keeping my consciousness on that life, not on duality, not on a denial of the presence of that life, but rather on the presence of that life. Now some of you have been involved in worldwide movements to do good in this world, and have thought that you were really doing good but you haven't known that you are working in the creation that is not the creation of God. What can you find in a divine creation that needs improvement? You've been working in a world of images. You've been working in the world that is not your Father's kingdom. And even when you succeed in it, all you can do is change an image in the world that is not your Father's kingdom to a better image. And it is still not your Father's kingdom when it is a better image. Whereas the way of the Father is there a place now where I am not? Why not purify your consciousness of the belief that there's a place somewhere where I am not? Instead of trying to correct a world of images. The world of images isn't to teach you that it needs correction. It's to teach you how to purify your consciousness of the belief that you're not in the kingdom of God. As long as in the world of images you see something wrong, you are not accepting in your inner consciousness that this is the kingdom of God. That's the purpose of the world of images. As long as you can see imperfection out there, you must face it with the knowledge that it wasn't created by God. And if you still think it's real, you have invented a second creator. Who could put the imperfection there if there's no other creator? Who could take God's perfect creation and make it imperfect? And so as long as you're still improving things, you've missed the point. The things that you want to improve don't need improvement. The consciousness that put them out there needs improvement. And that doesn't mean somebody else's consciousness. That means yours. Because the things you see out there are your consciousness made visible. Whoever else sees them, that is their consciousness made visible. Our function is to purify our consciousness so that we become aware of God's kingdom here on earth. And to clarify the picture then, you have a perfect divine creation here and now, and there is no other. You have a perfect divine being, an infinite being, not divided into little finite beings. And that infinite being is the life that we call God. And that is the only life there is. While you're dwelling in the inner consciousness, to tune out the world mind, you must tune out the belief that there's another life here beside the life of God. Where would it be if God is infinite? If this house that we're sitting in now were infinite, could you ever be in another one? If God is infinite, can you ever be outside of infinity? If you're always in infinity and God is life, you're in infinite life. Where does it divide? Where does this infinite divine life become anything other than what it is? And so we come out into the imaged world and we see 4 billion forms instead of knowing the one life. We are talking now in words, and you are hearing these words. And it is your belief that you're hearing them from someone sitting up on a podium in front of you. I'd like you to realize that isn't what's happening. You're hearing them inside your own self right now, just as I am hearing them inside myself right now. That's where you're hearing them. We're both hearing at the same fountain, although it appears that someone outside of yourself is talking to you. Every experience in your life is an experience within yourself that appears to be an external one. You cannot have an external experience. There is no such experience. Every such experience is a false belief. Whatever you see in yourself and think you're seeing it out there. Whatever you taste within yourself and think you're tasting it out there. Your complete experience is within. It appears without, because it's simultaneous. You can't catch it, but that's how it's happening. Usually, mortal mind in you is talking to or hearing mortal mind in someone else, or divine mind in you is hearing divine mind in someone else, or a mixture, a shadow of divine mind. Always your experience is within and you're thinking it's without. And so I want you to do this. Take an individual in the outer world and see if you can catch this idea that that individual that you think is out there is within yourself. Within yourself, just like a little TV screen within yourself. And see that individual within you on a little TV screen. And now let that person talk, and what's happening? They're talking within you on a little TV screen. No matter what they say or do, that's within you on a little TV screen. And if you saw this same person on TV and they complained to you about a problem, you would look at the TV and say, why, that's just an image on a TV screen. That's precisely what this world of images is. Every image is on the inner TV screen of your brain, which you think is out there. Now, those of you who can dwell with this a while will begin to get the idea that your dominion and your purification of consciousness is to see that every evil in the world is nothing more than a little TV screen inside your consciousness that is broadcasting a lie, an untruth, and made you believe it was external when it couldn't possibly be in the creation of God. When you reduce the images of the world into this little TV screen, you will find the whole world is on this little TV screen. And you will find if you don't let it get off the TV screen, what can keep your consciousness knowing it's only on an inner TV screen, it can't be real out there, because God didn't make it. If you can never let it get off that TV screen, you'll find you're beginning to feel the message of dominion. And I don't care what you have out there in the world. If you won't let it get off this little TV screen inside, you'll have caught part of what the Master was teaching all the time. To the man on the cross, standing beside him, about to be crucified like himself, I will take thee today into paradise. To the bondservant of the centurion, go thy way, he liveth. Why? All that was in the inner little TV screen, the lie about the Father. The allness of God is the rule, the law, the fact. Where is there a thief then on a cross? In this little TV screen of the mind. Catch it at that level. Don't fight it out there, it isn't necessary. Don't fight Pilate out there, it isn't necessary. Catch it inside, because it's coming through there at the same time as you see it outside. Everything has to come through your consciousness before it can appear out there to your consciousness. And you catch it at the level of its happening in consciousness, you'll see the nothingness of it. All evil in the world is in the human consciousness. That's the only place it is. It isn't in the world, it's in the human consciousness. There is no world. There is only the kingdom of God. Now, what we're at today, at this moment, is something that comes only from years of dwelling with it, until suddenly it announces itself to you. And you possibly may have sensed something along these lines at one time or another, but you'll discover your dominion is to be able to look at this world and everything in it, bring it right back to this little television screen inside your consciousness, maybe 1 inch big if you want to visualize it, just a little 1 inch screen, and whatever it's complaining about, it's nothing but a little TV broadcast coming from the world mind. That's the place to say sorry. The Father didn't bring you into this world. Is this of God, or is this the world mind? It's not of God, you know, if it's evil. Where is it? Who created it? No one. It's just a television broadcast, and if you leave it on, it's going to project itself. It's going to demand attention. Now, in the purification of your consciousness, then, you're saying to these broadcasts from within, which have appeared to you as images in the world without, get thee behind me. God is a pure being. God is the essence. Is there another essence? Is there another source? Can anything formed of that essence be less than the same essence? How can you dilute the essence of God? You can't. How can you change it? You can't. How can you pollute it? You can't. How can you poison it? You can't. How can you kill it? You can't. How can you give it a disease? You can't. Then what are you giving these things to? To nothing. To nothing whatsoever. The essence of God is omnipresent. You simply have been fooled by a world broadcast within yourself which makes you think it's out there. And don't think for a minute that I'm trying to build a picture as a sort of a comparison or an allegory or a symbolism. I mean it factually. What isn't created by God cannot be out there, and by reducing it to a little broadcast within yourself, you'll find you can throttle it at the level of conscious acceptance or conscious rejection. You can throttle it and turn your mind, your consciousness, to the presence of God. And watch how that little fellow inside begins broadcasting the truth. Every world image, regardless of its name, is an inner telecast that you are receiving which seems to be out there. We're all wired to the same world mind, and we all receive it almost simultaneously. It's no different than 6 billion TV sets. In your home you get it. In someone else's home they get the same thing. Here you're getting it right inside yourself at the same time as they're getting it inside themselves. And that's what makes everyone see it more or less the same. Don't meet it out there any more than you would go to a television set in your home and smash it because you didn't like the face of somebody on it. You wouldn't heal anything on a TV set screen. Get it right here at the level of TV and see the nothingness of it. That's all it is. The Bible calls it the arm of flesh. Christian Science calls it mortal mind. Others will call it universal mind. Others will call it Maya. Some will call it hypnotism. mesmerism. But the nature of it is that it mesmerizes you by appearing to be out there when it isn't. And why does it come through you? Because you have also accepted the image of you as a reality. Instead of knowing that you are a living soul. Now in our rebirth, out of this image, we're not going to throw the image away. It's very useful. But we are going to live in the consciousness of the presence of God. So that in our soul feeding, we are one with the one. That the one essence can flow into form instead of the duality of a world mind. So that we're not divided from the essence, so that the substance forms us. The Father who is greater than I is the essence, and I am the form of that essence. And the form of that essence that I am is the infinite Christ. The substance of the Father flows as the infinite Christ. And you find your spiritual form, which is not little pieces of light held together by magnetism, which is independent of the images of the world, independent of the flood and the fire, independent of world conditions. Why? Because world conditions only occur in the image world, where the image form appears. And we must learn to walk through these images, right through these images, by that consciousness which opens itself to the pure essence and lets the essence do the work. Now, how we're going to do that, how we're going to open our consciousness to the essence of being, to overcome the false dominion of the world and its two powers, is going to constitute all of our work. The real freedom will only come as we learn to look at the world of images, knowing what it is, so that we fear it not, so that its false powers mean nothing to us, so that we can consciously walk in oneness, in the acceptance that God is pure, and that purity, which is infinite, is the purity of my own being. That purity overflows and overflows and overflows throughout its kingdom as myself, my being. And I can live in my pure being, independent of the image world, which has been necessary to lift me and my consciousness above the level of duality. Those images, those wheats, those tares have been very important to me. They have helped me locate the unconscious belief I have entertained. I have seen those beliefs as images. Now I see them not as images but as invisible beliefs. And now I can watch them and reject them and turn my consciousness to the Father and rest in oneness. For 3 or 4 or 5 of these sessions, including the second half of this, we're going to be developing our conscious awareness of the presence of God. We have been given all of the weapons we need to do this. Nothing has been withheld. Let's have a little rest, quiet, and then we'll have a short intermission. Now, generally, we take quotations right out of the book here, and we discuss them. But before we go into that this week, I'd like to do something else. I'd like to suggest something you may not be doing. Now, you'll notice that at the bottom of every page, wherever there's a biblical quotation, the editor has taken the time to tell you where this quotation comes from. If it's 2 Chronicles 3, why, they don't just give you the quotation, they tell you where from. And all the way through, you have these quotations in the text, and although on the original letters, some of the quotations were not annotated at the bottom, in the book they are. And so let's not let that go unnoticed. In fact, to call it to your attention, what I've done then is I've taken a little sheet and I've just jotted down all of the quotations from the Bible in this chapter and where they're from. And the reason we're going to discuss them today instead of quotations other than biblical ones is I'd like you to develop this habit of reading. Our basic purpose is to overcome the false mortal sense of matter. And as you try to do that with your thinking mind, you're going to find failure is inevitable. These little words from the Bible are the way you do it. You grip hold of them just as hard as you can, and you study them, and you find that the words of Christ are the only way that you can overcome the belief in matter. In other words, your consciousness is at a crossroad. Here's the world mind life stream entering, and here's the divine life stream entering, and you've got the wheat and the tares. And to keep out the world mind, you must have truth in consciousness, so that every lie of the world mind that hits your consciousness hits a truth which nullifies that lie, rejects it, turns it away, and sends it back, so that it has absolutely no power in your consciousness to stay there or to persuade you or tempt you that you're in an imperfect universe. Truth in consciousness. Now, what truth should you put in your consciousness? Do you know a better truth than the words of God expressed through the Christ? What good are my words? What good are the opinions of any human being? If I go not away, how can the Comforter come unto you? The Comforter is Christ in you. The words of Christ in you are the truth in consciousness. And until you can hear Christ in you, you must take Christ in the Bible, because that was Christ in Jesus, that was Christ in prophets, that was Christ in Moses, and Christ in Joel Goldsmith. But basically, Christ in you is your goal. And to lead you to Christ in you are the words of Christ out here in the Bible. You see, those words were put there for that purpose, to lead you to Christ in you. And how can you then ignore those words? Or even read them quickly and say, oh yes, that's true. That's not it at all. These aren't words to remember. These are words to be fed into your soul, not to remember with your mind. These words, fed into your soul, become a living Bible. And the world mind approaching you is unable to penetrate, to defile, or maketh a lie. The seeds of evil, of falsity, of disease and disaster that are presented to your subconscious mind, at the unconscious level of your mind, are placed there by the world mind, but there is no consciousness in you to receive them. And you do it all without effort. You do nothing. You do not concern yourself with world mind. You concern yourself with truth in consciousness. Now, a very interesting thing happened. An individual said to me, a very fine student, one who has caught the meaning of the word, "Do you believe," he said, "that this is possible? I have come to a realization that only the presence of God is here. Is that possible?" Now that's a mighty important revelation. Only the presence of God is here. But the question was, is that right? And I had to answer this way. It was right when Jesus discovered it. Didn't you believe him? Did you have to prove it to yourself? Did you have to waste 50 years to prove it? When it's the Word of God given on this earth, what are we waiting for? Are we going to spend more lifetimes proving that his words are the truth? Of course it's the truth, but it was the truth 2,000 years ago when he said it, and it was the truth 3,500 years ago when Moses said it, and when Isaiah said it. Is there another God beside me? I know not any. I am that I am. There is no other. I and the Father are one, because there is no other. Isn't that the revelation of the allness of the presence? That the only presence here is the presence. Only the presence is present. Why should that come as a great surprise to us when it's been in Scripture all its time? And think of the time we could save and the effort and the suffering and the tribulation if we would simply say, the Christ said it. I don't want to prove it. I want to live by it. I'm not going to run around with a mind to try to spend 50 years to find out if it's true or not. I could spend that 50 years living it out. That's why these quotations from the Bible are so vital. You don't have to prove them. Are you going to prove that God told the truth? They're given to you so that you can trust them now. Before you can hear them within yourself, they're given to you out here in the Bible for you to hear them there and say, Amen. So be it. Now that word of the Father spoken through Christ in the Bible becomes your shepherd. You follow it. You believe it. You act with total faith in it. And it's going to lead you to the comforter within yourself. There's no other way to find the comforter within. First you accept the comforter without. Listen and you'll see what I mean. Take this one from Deuteronomy. And these are all out of the first chapter called Pure Being. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy might. Now we've heard that 5 million times. But we don't understand the meaning of loving the Lord. And you can tell by the things we do and say that we don't love the Lord. To love the Lord our God means to accept a perfect God. A perfect God doesn't make anything imperfect. When you accept imperfection, you're not loving the Lord thy God. You're doing the very opposite. You're saying the Lord my God did not create a perfect this or a perfect that. And that's what the meaning of love was intended to counteract, this human tendency. With all thy heart, mind, and soul is the total acceptance that only God is. There's nothing but divinity. There's nothing but divine substance. There's nothing but divine life. That's how you love the Lord thy God. Humanly, you might love somebody, but say, I love him, but he's kind of a dunce when you get down to it. But you couldn't do that about God. To love the Lord thy God is to accept the infinite perfection of God, to accept the total nature of God. You cannot love the Lord thy God and deny the perfect nature of God in any way. And so the minute you found an evil on the earth, you are denying the nature of God. The nature of God is to be all-knowing. When you found an evil, you were saying God doesn't know about this evil. Or even worse, you're saying here's the evil and God does know about it, but God's not doing something about it, so I will do it. We will form a movement to do this thing that God isn't doing, because that's what God wants us to do. Now you know that's wrong. If God wanted it done, why would God ask you to do it? Why wouldn't it have been done? And it has been done. It has been done perfectly. And your acceptance of an evil that you are going to counteract is your unknowledge or lack of knowledge, your ignorance of the nature of God. There is no evil for you to counteract. Your belief that it's there is the way you are not loving the Lord thy God with all your heart, mind, and soul. You're denying the presence of God where you have found the evil. You're denying the omnipotence of God where you have found the evil. You can't say, I believe in God's nature as being omnipotent, but God isn't doing something about this condition. Now, omnipotence would have done something about that condition before you discovered it. So what have you discovered? You have been fooled by sense images. They're very real to you. So real that they make you not love the Lord thy God. They make you deny the omnipotence and omnipresence of God and the omniscience of God, the qualities of God. And so you have God permitting somebody to poison his people. You have God permitting somebody to pollute his atmosphere. But it isn't his atmosphere. That's why you think it's polluted, because you thought it was his atmosphere. It isn't. If it were his atmosphere, how could anybody pollute his atmosphere if God is omnipotent? It would be impossible. How could anybody suffer a disease of any kind if God were omnipotent? So what you're saying then is, I have this thing, God is not omnipotent. Or you're going all the way out with a church message that God is punishing you, or him, or her. Or that stillborn baby, that God was punishing that baby too. And God was punishing that mongoloid, and that imbecile, and that one, and that one, and that one. Ridiculous, of course. There's nobody to punish. There's only God being. To love the Lord thy God, then, with all thy heart, mind, and soul, means to accept that there's only God being. Then who are you? I and the Father are one. One being. Then who is sick? The image you have conceived of yourself because you were asleep and the world mind planted an image in your mind. And that mind, being very versatile, a perfect mirror of the world mind, it showed it forth as a perfect reflection of the lie. A perfect Xerox copy of the lie. And you parade around and you say, I've got this. Where's God? Why isn't God taking it away from you? Why isn't God making you better? The simple reason is God has already done just that. God has already made you a perfect being. And so be ye perfect. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart by rejecting every idea, however it may seem total, that you are sick or suffering or lacking or anything of that nature. It's a lie. It isn't loving God. It's not understanding that to love God means to understand the nature of God. You cannot love what you do not understand. The nature of God is perfection in all things. The nature of God is one body. There's only one body. And it isn't sick. There's only one substance. It isn't sick. There's only one life. It isn't sick. What is sick? Nothing. Nothing is sick. That's all that can be sick, is nothing. And if you persist in thinking that the image is something, it can be sick. Because when you have an image that you think is something, that is what idolatry is all about. Now you can take a dumb piece of stone or a dumb piece of wood and pray to that. Or you can take a dumb image and pray to that. Or you can go to the kingdom of God within you and you find you don't have to pray. The consciousness of the Father is your consciousness. The acceptance of that consciousness where you are as present, alive, alert, intelligent, all-knowing, all-powerful is your guarantee that right now here I am on holy ground. God is right here. The omnipotence of God is preventing any possibility to that perfection from being less than itself. The all-knowing mind is perfectly patrolling its kingdom right here. You're accepting yourself to be the essence of God. And his essence being pure, perfect, forever. To love God is to accept that that which the Father is, his essence, I am, and therefore I am pure, perfect, forever. You can't love God and not accept his substance to be your substance. That's the meaning of love fulfills the law. You're accepting God to be your substance, your very being. And then all of you that is not God, get out of it. Get out of the mind that is not God's mind. Get out of the body that is not God's body. Get out of the life that is not God's life. There isn't God life and your life. There's God life, the essence, the perfect essence, being your perfect life. The one you're living in that you think is imperfect is fiction. There is no such life. And that's the meaning then in Deuteronomy. And that's why when you come across a passage of the Christ, you must not remember it. You must take it into your consciousness and dwell with it. Now, if we were to go through this chapter or this book in 12 easy lessons, we would have a fine memory course. You can't take the word of Christ that quickly. You've got to abide with it. I must love the Lord my God. I must accept the Lord my God with all my heart, with all my mind, with all my soul. There's nothing left that I've got to accept with. Now, how can I accept anything else? There's no room except to accept the Lord. In other words, accept the allness of God. Do you see that change in consciousness that begins to demand of you? What else am I accepting beside the presence of God? That's got to go. The images out here are going to keep knocking at my door, needing help, unless I get into this change of consciousness which recognizes only God is present. The only presence on this earth is the presence of God. Only the presence is present. Only God is present. Deny it, and you're not loving God with all your heart, mind, and soul. And so instead of remembering the quotation, remember the Christ of your being spoke it through Moses. And so get back into your invisible consciousness. Take these phrases, dwell there with these phrases, explore them, let them communicate to you. Open them up like a fan and examine every word. Spend time with them. They will become your inner Bible. And then when you have fanned them out and let them speak to you, be still. And they will speak again in another tongue. In that stillness, they will be planted as seeds in your consciousness, just as the seeds of the tares were planted by the world mind. And let the lie come to you again. It will find that in you is the truth which nullifies the lie. And out there in the image world, you'll find the divine beginning to express in those images in your world. The uninterrupted flow of the substance of truth in consciousness opens up the capacity of your consciousness to receive the living substance from the Father. The soul feeds you. The mind responding to soul no longer projects the duality of the world mind. You don't have to think and think and think and plan and plan. These words will do it for you if you will live with them, not in your mind, but deeper. They will take you to the above universe. They are the messengers. They are the way that the way shower uses to take you out of mind into soul. And so that's why we're discussing them this carefully this time. Every time you see a footnote saying Luke 15:27, if you pass it by, don't pretend to yourself that you read that chapter. You didn't. You read it like people read, but not like students of spirit. And that's why we don't read 5 books and say, I read 5 books of Goldsmith, or I read them all. We don't do it that way. We sip. We cogitate. We contemplate. We commune. We let these phrases become an integral part of our being. We let them rejoin the Christ within who uttered them in the first place. You see, these words and the Christ of your being are inseparable. They have never been divided. And they return to their source, which is Christ in you, and if you will follow them, you will be led right to the Comforter within. Continue in my words, and you shall know the truth. These are my words, and they will lead you to the Comforter, who is the fountain of all truth. And you will find you take dominion over the world of images, yes, even over the physical form. Don't think that we have just walked by and closed our eyes to the things that trouble us. We haven't done that at all. We've simply learned a better way to eliminate from our lives those things which are not of God. We're not blind to these things at all. We're so aware of them that the complete dedication of the message is to lead you out of this Egypt of the world mind, in which diseases are, in which problems are. We're not unaware of their presence in the world of images. That's all it's filled with. But we don't have to live in them. We have an invisible paradise, and as we start to love that paradise, we see why the Father is greater than I. You remember the tumbler in this chapter and the glass. The glass is the substance of the tumbler. One is a form and one is a substance. The tumbler is the form, the glass is the substance, and Joel used that to point out the meaning of the Father is greater than I. I, the human self out here, am the tumbler. The Father is the glass. Translated spiritually, the Father is the essence, and the Christ is the form. The essence becomes the form. And they are one. They are not separated. And so the Father and I are one, and the Father is greater than I. I am the essence of God made into form. What form? Not this visible form. Into the form which is made of essence. The essence of God is never visible. So I am spiritual form, formed of the essence of God, and that is my name. And if you listen to a world broadcast and you look at me, you will see a world broadcast in you which says that I am physical form, and you will believe it. And you will think that I am out here as physical form, and you will be listening to the false broadcast. I'm not out here as physical form, and if I look at you, you only seem to be there as physical form. You are the essence of God. That is your name. That is your substance. And the form of you is formed of that essence, and it isn't the form that my eyes can see, because my eyes are also part of the false broadcast. My very senses are part of the false broadcast. My very physical being is that false broadcast made into visibility. But inside, in my divine consciousness, loving the Father supremely, I can shake off the mortal myth. And you can shake off the mortal myth until you realized that you are standing in the presence of God every moment of your life. And that presence is the essence of your being. Honor it. Love it. And everywhere you look, accept only it. Not the pollution, not the poison, not the disease, not the lack, not the limitation. Do not honor them by believing that the image world is real. And come back to the mind that was accepting them as real and see that the mind which accepts them is also part of the image world. That little brain, which is aware of that which God did not create, is nothing more than an image. It too is part of the world broadcast. All of this is to lift us out of the level of human mind into the acceptance of these words, which are the words of truth, and we steadfastly hold to their truth instead of the truth that the human mind tries to bring to us. Why? Because the truth of the human mind is this inner flow from the world mind, and we catch it at that level. Put a little box around it and look at it right inside there, and you can see why he could say to Pilate, "Thou hast no power." Pilate was just a television broadcast to him. Can you fear something on television? Put a box around it and look at it. That's what the world mind is broadcasting to you all around you. It has no power. It can't step out of the box. There is no other power than the power of the One. The essence of God is where the power is, and nobody is pushing that power aside. Now then, you have the power of that essence, which is omnipotence. And so there's nothing that can enter that can be powerful over omnipotence. There's no other power. There's only the power of good, of perfection. And the broadcast fools you, because it comes out sometime so close to home that you think it's real. Now these phrases become very meaningful and potent as you see that they're not just sentences written by an author. They are the word of substance. You can trust these phrases, and you can look at whatever you see and know that because God is present and God is the power, that power is maintaining its own essence right here. I am perfect now as my Father, and nothing in the world can ever change that. Nothing. There can be a lot of broadcasts, a lot of images saying that I'm not, but nothing can change the fact that I am as perfect as my Father. Nevertheless, because the tumbler is always made of the qualities of the glass, and the child of God is always made of the qualities of the essence of God. So I cannot be less than my Father. Or if I think I am less, then I am not loving God supremely. Because who is there to be less if God is one? What other one is there to be less? How could you be less than God if God is one? I and the Father are one. There's a secret in so many ways. When you and the Father are one, in your consciousness, you are accepting his statement. Not you're going to become one. His secret was learning that I and the Father are one. Now, you could spend another 50 years to prove it. Or you could simply say, I and the Father are one. Now, what about me is unlike God? Whatever is not that one. This arm isn't like God. It can't be my real arm. The brain isn't like God. It can't be your real brain. Your body isn't like God. It can't be your real body. You're out in the image world. Use that image to its advantage, for its purpose. Wherever it is imperfect, take yourself back to your invisible consciousness. Now out here there's arthritis. In your invisible consciousness there must be a belief in arthritis. Do you see that? There must be a belief there, or it couldn't be out here. This out here body is the mirror through which you see your invisible consciousness. And the belief is in your invisible consciousness. Now why waste time out here with lineaments? Or with electrical heating? That's relief. Get rid of the belief down here. How do you do it? That's what these words are. Do you believe in here that you can have arthritis, or do you love the Lord thy God with all your heart, mind, and soul? Do you love the essence of God? Do you accept it as your essence? Does it have arthritis? Can it have arthritis? No, but it is my essence. All right, take these two and sit there until you accept that essence and not the conscious belief that you can have arthritis, because the you that can have it is saying, I'm not that essence. You see how you come down to the point where you've got to face it. I'm either that essence of God, or I'm accepting myself as something else. And as long as you're something else, you're in the world. And the world is not God's creation. And you're asking for trouble. A greater iniquity can come upon you. And a greater one, and a greater one, and a greater one, because the one and only sin is not knowing and believing and accepting and trusting that you are the essence of God, and therefore the mind which denies it is a liar. And you will not listen to that mind, but you will listen within yourself. For I and the Father are one essence, today, now, this minute, forever, before Abraham and after the world. Continuous essence of God is your name. You can be no other. Every word, then, is to make you consciously drop every belief that denies who you are. In Matthew 5:48, be ye perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. Now there's the statement that God is perfect. God is perfect. 5:48 Matthew. But God is the substance of your being, as revealed also in I and the Father are one. Now how can you be imperfect if you're one with the perfect God? To go on believing you can be is to deny the truth. You suffer from the lie. You cannot be imperfect, and whatever appears to be imperfect where you are is a lie. The suffering isn't happening. The pain isn't happening. It's happening in this distortion of image. Get out of the image, back into the consciousness. The consciousness has received a seed or a tear, a lie, below the level of your knowledge, and now it's showing forth as an imperfection. But use the truth in consciousness. God is perfect. I and the Father are one, therefore I and perfection are one. How could imperfection enter perfection? It wouldn't be perfect if imperfection could enter it. I am perfect. Now, why am I not experiencing that perfection? Because I haven't quite accepted that God is the only creation, the only power, the only substance, the only law, and I must do it again and again and again in consciousness until something springs up inside me, a great knowing. This isn't something I have to make happen. It's the isness of being now. Let's conclude today's class now with a meditation, letting the fullness of what we have learned permeate our being.
I hope you enjoy this spiritual audio. Like, share and subscribe for more.